Okay, this video is a remake of my video on pawn promotion, castling, and en passant. So first I want to kind of cover pawn promotion. Another chess rule concerning pawns is when the pawn gets to an end of the board. Now remember, in the 2D view, white moves sort of up the screen and black moves down the screen, or at least the pawns do. So this means that this pawn here originally started on this square here, and it probably has moved. Rather, it could have moved 2 and then 1 and then 1 and then 1. Who knows how it got there? But the rule is when it gets to this square here, to the very end, and for black it would be any one of these squares, if you don't know. I just highlighted here. When white moves to the end, or a pawn gets to the end, it promotes to any other chess piece. So it could promote to a rook, it could promote to a knight, it could promote to a queen, it could promote to a bishop. It just can't promote to a king. And the most popular definitely is a queen. But there are cases to where a pawn is promoted to anything but a queen. Technically that's called an under promotion, but very typically it's promoted to a queen. So when it gets to the end here, when white makes, if it's white's move and it makes it to the end, you have a choice between a queen, a rook, a bishop, and a knight. So let's just put a queen there. So that's what happens. So that is pawn promotion. So when a pawn gets to the end and moves to the end, it promotes to another piece. Okay, now let's move on to castling. I've set up this position on the board to talk about castling. So castling is a move where the king, that involves the king and the rook, they sort of exchange places, and the king only ever moves 2 squares, and then the rook sort of comes around the other side. So like for this white king here, the king would move 2 squares to here, and then the rook would move 2 squares. Maybe I should make it a different color, like here. So maybe if I just were to make the move, if it's white's the move, it would look like that. So as you see, the king moved 2 and the rook moved 2 and sort of came around the other side. Okay, let's see if I can get this a little bit clearer for the black king. So, like I said, the king only ever moves 2, like this. And then, so let me just highlight the square green where the king would move to, these 2. Notice that depending on what side of the board you go to, the king is sort of closer to, on this side of the board. He's a little bit closer to this edge. The castle's this side, which is called the queen side. He's a little bit further away. And then the rook would come to the square I'm highlighting in red. Okay, so, but let's go over some various rules, and I'll actually show the castling maneuver, but I've set up the board to illustrate some of the other rules. And here are some of the other rules. 1, the king and rook have not moved, meaning you can't, if you move your king, you can't castle to either side. And the rook cannot have moved. So actually, if you move your rook, you can't castle to that side. So let's say if I move this rook right here, then I won't be able to castle to this side. I could castle over here. The next rule is that it must be clear between the king and the rook. That's one of the reasons why I've set up the board this way. You can see over here there's no pieces between the king and the rook, so you can castle this way. Now over here, you can't castle. White cannot castle this side because effectively, while the king would go here and the rook would go here, this rook is sort of moving through or across this knight over here. So actually white cannot castle to this side over here because it's not clear between the king and the rook. The knight's in the way. Now for the black king, there's no pieces in the way. And we're assuming that the king and rooks have not moved in this position. Next thing is the king cannot be in check. So if you're in check, if your opponent moves and threatens to capture your king, you can't move your king. Let's say the black queen moved to here, and that obviously it's threatening to capture the king. So if the black queen moved to here, giving check, one of your responses cannot be the castle. And the last rule is you can't move through check. So actually, if you don't know, black cannot castle to this side because the white queen here what's called controls this square right here, meaning as the king moves through from here, it's sort of crossing this square right here, and the queen could actually capture the king as it moves through this square. So that's called moving through check. So that means black is not allowed to castle to this side. So let's just move a few pieces. So let's say it's white's turn. White's going to move the knight to here just because it wants to castle to either side. And then let's say black moved to here. The reason it did that was to block. That way it could castle to either side. And now actually white could castle to either side. If it castled on the king side, which is this side over here, the king would move 2 and the rook would come to the other side. Or it could castle to the other side. Could move 2 squares and the rook would come to this side. So that would be castling that side. Let's say the king decided to castle this side. Now it's black's turn. Now black could castle this side. The king would move 2 and the rook would come around to this side. Notice it's not moving through check because this piece here, we moved this black bishop here, so it's no longer, so this queen is no longer, so black's no longer moving through check. So black could castle that side, or could castle this side. And that's how that would occur. Okay? Now let's talk about en passant. Okay, I've set up this position to talk about en passant, which is, I think really means in passing, and it's a special pawn rule, and it really affects basically when a pawn is on its starting position. So realistically, we're only talking about these 2 pawns, and it decides to move 2 squares initially. Remember, the pawn on its original square has a choice of moving 1 or 2. So like in this, black pawn can move 1 or 2. If it decides to move 2 squares, if you think about it, this black pawn here, it sort of just moved right by this pawn. In converse, maybe I'll stick with just one example. So if this white pawn here moves 2, it sort of moves by this black pawn, and just recall that a pawn only captures diagonally to the side, which means it sort of went right by the black pawn, and this black pawn here never got a chance to capture it. So if you think about it, this white pawn is sort of charging out. If it charges out 2 moves, or maybe we'll just call it if it moves 2 moves, it's charging out. This black pawn here never got a chance to capture it. And this is what en passant allows for. It says that if the pawn moves 2 and 2 like this, that black has an opportunity. If it has a pawn in this position, basically this pawn has to be so far advanced that on black's next move, or on your opponent's next move, it has the option of capturing the pawn as if it was on this square. So what does that mean? That means if black moves 2, sort of going by the square that your opponent could capture, black has the option of capturing only on the next move. It can't wait for a bunch of moves, so it has to be on the next move. So think about it, is that en passant, so I think that means in the past. So as that pawn is passing, black has an opportunity to capture it, but only on the next move. So sort of like as the pawn charges by, black has an opportunity to capture it. Conversely, if this pawn here charged through, then white would have an opportunity to capture it on its next move like this. So how would that work? Well, if white moved, then black would actually have the option to capture, just like this. This pawn here actually captures as if white's pawn was on this square. So we just pretend the pawn is there and we capture like this. Now see how white's pawn is captured, it disappears, and black's pawn is put there. So that is en passant. So maybe I'll just back up and maybe white moved here and then black moved up to white would have the opportunity to capture en passant like that. That would be from white's point of view. And that is en passant.